Hello everyone, this is Svetlana from Marco 7s. Thank you all for attending today's webinar, Finance Transformation, Harnessing the Right Technologies to Ensure Finance Drives Value Across the Organization, brought to you in partnership with Datamatics. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see, at the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We'll try to answer as many as possible during the Q&A session, but if a full answer is needed or we simply run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you in a separate email after the webinar. We also have attendees chat available for you today to interact with each other. And if you would like to support our speakers, feel free to use the emoji function, as all your reactions will be seen at the back end as well. A copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any materials or bookmark any links you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the help widget just at the bottom of your screen. And finally, please expect an email within 2 hours after the webinar with links to download the webinar slides and recording. At this point, I'd like to briefly introduce you to our host and moderator of the webinar, Armand Angeli, Vice President, Digital Transformation and International Groups at DFCG. Armand, it is over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you. But it's not only about me, it's about our panelists. And first of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation to be a moderator and a speaker on this panel. And maybe a few more words about myself. I have a few decades of experience with in finance operations with IBM, GE, PwC, Grant Thornton, HP. And so I have seen finance transformation from all the sides, either as a CFO, as an auditor, as a service provider, and also as an internal consultant. And because I've seen all of that for all these years, I am now chairing or co-chairing a large community of finance people, mainly in France, but it's also very international, a community of finance people exchanging on all these topics, because it's not always easy. And being based in France, and tomorrow being Bastille Day, I would like to say that sometimes finance transformation can be a true revolution. So with that, I would like to have my co-panelists introduce themselves. So maybe David?
Thank you, Armand. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is David Ray. I am the Global Accounting and Reporting Senior Director, or one of them, at Huawei Global Finance. Much like Armand, my background is very much around finance transformation, digitalization, back to my HP days as well, and also looking at it most recent years with ESG, and looking at how these two processes are not only converging, but both becoming increasingly digital. And then thinking about data management, data governance, and what sits underneath all of that to make it work. I'm also the president of the international group at DFCG in France, and just recently accepted a board position for the International CFO Alliance and chair the ESG working group there. So it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you, Armand, for the very kind introduction.
You're welcome. Sunil.
Yep, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure over here already for last 2 minutes, just to be in presence of Armand as well as David. And I'm very happy to talk a little bit about myself. My name is Sunil Dixit, and based in US, I'm a head for FS and DMS systems for Datamatics. And I'm a part of Global 500 CFOs Club in a way where I've interacted with many of them in the past many years and helping them in transformation, as well as, in fact, working with Armand, working with David, sharing the mind. So all those things which are very critical finance transformation, that's what I've been doing for past many years. So that's kind of quick from my side, and look forward for productive discussion over here.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. Thank you, David. So we have a bit less than 1 hour, and we want to discuss actually how to be successful with a finance digital transformation. The title seems to say that it's all about technology, but we will try to prove or to explain that it's not always the case. And so we have prepared about 6 questions that we are going to discuss or chat around. And then we will take your questions from the audience in the last 10 minutes. But you can start writing questions in the chat. And I see we already have some questions, so we will try to take them at the end. If not, include the answers in our chat. Okay, since I have the mic, let me start. The first question that we, the CFOs ask themselves. So, what are the true levers for finance transformation? And so lately we have jumped on technology, new technology, RPA, AI, but we should not forget that it's not only about technology, and this new technology is also about the other levers that we use to actually to work with from the 90s, or late 90s or early 2000, meaning working with the actual organization. Should we have people together in shared services? Should we outsource? So first we worked with on the organization and the people. Then we said, that's not enough. Maybe we should look into the processes. And then came Lean Six Sigma, all these good things to transform processes, to make them more lean, more efficient, more productive. And then it was the era of the ERP, of the cloud, so with the start of some technology. And more recently, we jumped into technology, us finance people. And I have to say, we did that because when we would ask our friends from IT to help us with having a system doing everything to facilitate our business, IT would say, yes, we can do it, but it might be expensive, it can take time. So when we heard about these new tools like RPA, we jumped into it, maybe a bit too fast. And so now the situation is that we have a lot of technology we can play with, but we need to make sure that we have the right balance with the other levers, people, organization, processes, and the last one, which is becoming more and more important, is data. We have come to realize that we don't have all the data we need in quantity, in quality, to work with for the automation and for the successful transformation. So that's my take on the levers, but I'm sure Sunil and David would like to comment to what I said. If they wish.
Maybe I'll jump in just with one additional point, because to be honest, Armand, you gave a really thorough answer and covered all of the aspects I would have covered as well. I think the one thing that is also equally important when we talk about finance transformation is if we extend the people concept that Armand introduced and think about the importance of taking people through a journey and having them be part of that journey. So a big part of whether or not any transformation is going to be successful, whether it's in finance or anywhere else, is that it needs to be something that's done on a collaborative basis and not something that's done to us. So I think that's a big takeaway that I've taken from the years, is just making sure there's that buy-in from the very beginning. They're contributing, they're participating, and they're actively engaging in transformation from that perspective, and doing so cross-functionally, not just the finance function, but of course, the partner functions that we work with day in and day out. I think it's really a collective effort and a critical success factor if we're going to be successful. So that's the only piece I would add. And I know we're going to get into people a little bit more, so I'll stop there.
Sunil.
Yeah. So I'm going to say between two of you, you covered everything. I think the definition of transformation, what I'm hearing more and more is, as you covered, it's beyond the technology, and it is more about transform to perform. And when you say transform to perform, it's not just the technology aspect to it; it's also people, resources, and the quality of life. The technology is just enabler at the end of the day, and actually it helps you to do the transformation. So the transform to perform concept, which is more and more picking up, that's something which is valuable. So I think that's something you already covered the rest all points. Just a quick few cents from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. Let me also add that when we talk about technology, we sometimes we forget that Excel is a great tool. So between from Excel to AI, we have a lot of technology we can choose from. Could be API, could be actually an ERP, could be best of breed, and I'm sure Sunil that you've seen all of that with your clients. So new technology, but let's not forget the old ones, or I mean what we call the old ones, which have proven being very strong. Okay, so let's go to question 2, and so here again, what are the primary goals of transformation of successful transformation? Most people would say productivity, but it's not only about productivity. So maybe David, you can comment on that.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Ahmed. So yes, I agree. I mean, certainly productivity has been the goal that I've heard of projects in years gone by. The other objectives I've heard, of course, have been cost reduction. That's often a significant driver for why an organization wants to transform in some way, is to drive down its ultimate cost. But part of what I also hear, and I think is really helpful, is moving the finance function and transforming it in a way that it becomes decision useful and business enabling. So it's not just about productivity, but it's really about how much more value can we end up providing, because, for example, we're taking away routine activities and we're freeing up the time of finance professionals throughout the organization to be able to provide more business partnering, to be able to provide more insight, more support to the business, and ultimately help them, whether it's in the context of market development, whether it's product development, or whatever the case may be. So it's really thinking about how we use technology and transformation as a mechanism through which we can fundamentally transform the finance organization so that we structure it differently, the roles are structured differently, the activities that we're doing are structured differently, and we can glean and extract more value from the function with the team that we have, and that we're effectively moving activities that can be relegated, for example, to RPA plus, some of the old technologies, as Ahmed was referring to, but they are valuable technologies because they perform these tasks incredibly well. So if we can leverage technology to allow us that kind of evolutionary journey and the transformation of roles, we'll be able to attract more talent, we'll be able to retain more talent. And of course, to be able to do that, we need to make sure that we're investing in that talent so that we're retraining them with the skills that are needed. So whether we're talking about digital skills, we're talking about data analytical skills, we're talking potentially data scientist type activities. There are a lot of activities that have typically been thought of as IT related functions. But when you end up having a look at how roles are changing as a result of increasing uses around technologies, including AI, machine learning, and many others, it's really interesting to see that we're having to reskill. Now, the good news is a lot of the bodies that these finance leaders and individuals end up working for are recognizing this trend. And they're actually building this into their development and capability programs so that ultimately these skill sets are being taught and built into certifications much, much earlier. but it's all a reflection of how technology and digital has really transformed what we do from, if you think about a few years ago, or many years ago now, just from transaction processing, you then think about business partnering. And now we're actually talking about being a value added activity and much more strategic to the organization. And that's been as a result of these kinds of transformations and the function adapting to it. So I think that the primary goals have certainly shifted. I think the objectives long-term, I think, are healthy. And I think, as Armand mentioned a little bit earlier, it's really this balance between people, process, and tools. And I think it's this combination and getting the maximum value from our most important asset, which frankly is the individual, and being able to do that in a way that provides value that goes well beyond cost reduction, productivity, and some of the more traditional metrics. So that's probably the initial thought that I'll leave out, and maybe Sunil or yourself want to add a little bit more as well.
Yeah, so Sunil. I think, David, you answered it beautifully, and you have covered most of the aspects of it. In fact, the idea over here is that when we talk about the primary goals and ultimate results, that itself is a kind of moving target nowadays. So you set the primary goal, you achieve it, and then you keep moving. And it keeps on going up and up. So that being said, it's definitely productivity is one aspect to it, but beyond that, you already beautifully covered it. There are other aspects to it as well. Those are also important. So extending beyond enhanced productivity is given because of productivity, you basically want to do something different. But at the same time, you also keep on appending your own goals and benchmarks so that you go upward.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. And actually, I hope you would agree with what I will say, that now when we ask our colleagues CFOs what have been the outcome, they say, you know what, my outcome has been customer experience, improving the customer experience, whether the customer is my client, is my supplier, or is my accountant. So customer, and of course, meaning all the employees. So now we are putting employees' satisfaction in the middle, together with customer experience, as a goal for transformation, and cost reduction, productivity just comes as a cherry on the cake. If you start by thinking about customer experience, employee satisfaction, and of course process improvement, because by having a process end-to-end, you satisfy all the stakeholders. But David, there is something we also Sunil, we should say is the outcome, if not the primary goal, is compliance. Compliance of our processes, but also compliance with the new regulations. And come to my mind. The first one is electronic invoicing. To do a good electronic invoicing, which is required by our governments, we have to review our processes. So that's finally, eventually, compliance is helpful, even though it's forced on us. But us CFOs and auditors, we like it. So electronic invoicing, but the main one now more and more, I see, and David, I would like you to comment, ESG, because to do a good extra reporting, you need, but I will let you talk on how you can leverage technology to be compliant with these new regulations of ESG.
It's a great question, and to be honest, we could probably have a seminar just talking about ESG and data management.
Don't worry.
It's a broad subject. I think you ask a really interesting question, because we're still in the infancy of organizations honestly just coming to terms with the regulation that is moving towards us very, very quickly in this particular space. Where organizations and CFOs that I've been speaking to, where they typically are, is they're still at the data stage. What data do I need? Where do I get it from? How do I make sure the data is of sufficient quality? How do I make sure that I can demonstrate lineage and things like that? And to be frank, they're not even at the digital transformation stage yet. Certainly that needs to come. And that's something that's been talked about quite extensively in the context of public good and how we think about innovations that are in the public good interest, and thinking about the transfer of data from the point of data creation all the way through consumption, and think about that on a multi-stakeholder level and making sure it's digital from inception all the way through consumption. That kind of thinking is not yet mainstream. You know, most organizations are still very much in the, this is my data world that I need to be worried about. And there's less thought around what happens upstream or downstream. It's more about how I solve my own immediate challenges. So yes, I do think that compliance is playing a role in what's happening, and certainly in ESG, because it's getting the traction, it's playing a role as well. But we also don't have consistency yet in ESG being consistently managed by the CFO function either. So there's still a divide in a number of organizations between CSOs, chief sustainability officers versus chief financial officers. So I think that needs time to be able to normalize. But frankly, you know, what I'm also seeing as well, when you talked about compliance, I agree wholeheartedly. It's a driver, but I don't see it being the primary driver. I see it a little bit like it's almost a minimum standard that needs to be met. You know, for any kind of IT provider that's coming into an organization that's partnering with them, that's a baseline. And if they don't even meet the baseline, then there's no discussion beyond that. So I still think that the primary goals go beyond the basics like productivity and compliance, but those things are baseline expectations. I think that's probably how I would think about them more, and what I'm hearing more from CFOs. But certainly ESG, I think, is going to fundamentally change and transform the way that information and data is managed, be it at the moment, it's still very manual, but frankly, it's going to move to digital very, very quickly. I think scope 3 reporting is going to require it, because if we don't get to that point, I think it's going to be an extremely difficult endeavor. But again, that's going to be something that will need to be solved cross-industry and cross-borders, which again brings in a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, thank you, David. Sunil, how is ESG impacting what your clients are asking from you?
Yeah, it is. I would say that has become a kind of hygiene factor for the past few years, I'll say, recent past. 10 years ago, people were not talking about it. Nowadays, that becomes like a starting point. Hey, well, what is your organization does? What are your initiatives? In fact, we have elaborative initiatives on this particular part. But so that has become like a more or less like a hygiene factor. And that's what alluded by David as well, that, hey, well, this is something which is done, and we would like to know what your organization does to help that cause. And as long as you have those things in place, then let's talk more about how we can do further. So there's some of these things are given, and some of these things you build upon. And one of the things which is happening in this situation is also the new generation is coming in the play, and it's something which is kind of interesting phenomena which is happening, and especially in North America also we are seeing that there's a trend where the younger generation is looking for a little bit beyond money, beyond productivity, beyond certain things. They're also looking for what's happening to the environment, what's happening to the different business situations. So it is not about just productivity, just money. People want all, and that all list is actually growing. So we'll see how it goes, and but some of these things are something which are really interesting, and those are evolving, and it's great to be part of this journey, where we would like to take it further. But as David mentioned earlier, it's something. Some things are hygiene, and some things you build upon further. So it is a little bit beyond just productivity gain or what you expect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Sunil. But we are all finance people, and we have to explain to our CEO, to our top finance management, that we want to embark into a transformation, meaning it can be costly, so these stakeholders would like to see some ROI. As we said, it's not only about productivity, cost reduction, meaning quantitative ROI, it's also about, uh, I would say, qualitative. So, how do you, yourself, Sunil, and your team, when you work on new projects, and so you are requested ROI. So how do you define what the ROI should be to the stakeholders so that they embark
Yes.
with a vision?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, that's the kind of ROI is something which is tricky question, and depending on which day, which year you ask this question, your answer may be a little bit different. Now, if you look at pure play finance point of view, all of us we love me myself being finance executive. We all love numbers, and we all want as best as possible. You know, from value point of view, hey, well, give me the lowest, give me the best, in all those things. But given that, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when the globe or the world was attacked with this pandemic situation, suddenly the priorities were changed, and suddenly the ROI over there was a little bit more than just hey, well, how much cost you'll save. At that particular time, the ROI was counted more or less that, hey, well, can you make my organization or enterprise run without people coming to office, or they can stay in home and they can still work. So as you can see, the share prices of companies like Zoom, etc., they suddenly skyrocketed because those are the companies who were providing those technologies. So if you look at this ROI part, the way I look at it is that there is certain ROI. People, as finance executives, transformation point of view, they expect, from my perspective, minimum 5x. That's what industry standard. They at least minimum look for that part. But I'll say that ROI is changing landscape, and it is now more than just ROI of 5x. Well, how it helps me in business, how it helps me in addressing some of the current situation. In fact, I would like to cite one more example from ROI point of view, especially with the compliance part. Some of the companies can run certain operations in certain countries. Some of the countries, they have certain exceptions to certain companies. So if you look at it now, ROI is becoming a little bit more complicated than just money part or just the finance aspect of it. It's also about, hey, well, this is my country specific rule. And then how do you manage that? How do you ensure that you provide me the service at the same time I am not in violation of any kind of compliance? So these three things which are very, very important for finance executive, which is control, cost, and compliance, and all three needs to be satisfied, at the minimum. So ROI, from my perspective, the companies who bring the ROI, which are more value based and which are something which are helping organization to move forward, whether it is growing business, whether it's in compliance terms, whether it's a cost term. I'll say all of the above. That's what is market is heading. And some of the newer tools that has been introduced, AI, these are disruptive. And that being said, we are talking about ROI over here. Some of these technologies are so new that at this point people are still figuring out how to cost it, how to price this kind of services or solutions they are bringing to the table, so that actually will bring in that ROI for finance executives. So it's kind of interesting topic, and the way I look at it is that the real ROI is more or less that companies needs at that particular point of time, and at the same time it's a moving target, and companies who are evolving with this ROI, who provide the benefit to other organizations, those are the ones who will thrive and survive and prosper. That's the way I look at it. But David, would like to hear from your side as well.
yeah, David, how do you price not being a name on the list, a name and shame, or not receiving a fine? So, what's your take on that?
It's a really good question. So, one aspect we haven't talked about on ROI, and maybe I'll share it as a complementary line of thinking to what Sunil has already covered, and I agree with what he's talked about already. So there's a growing group, let's say, of chief data officers who are really looking at ROI on the data itself. So when we talk about digitalization, or we talk about transformation, it typically means that the data becomes more accessible. And they're looking at the data to say, okay, now I've got this data in a format that I can extract differently from. I can look at it from a different use case perspective than perhaps what I've looked at it from before. And they're really starting to think about how you determine the return on investment of the data itself that's created through the transformation or the digitalization. So it's really interesting to see how they're looking at that, not just from a valuation to be able to raise capital, because certainly there's that aspect. As you can well imagine, it's a growing trend that I'm hearing about in the US. And Sunil, you've probably already heard about this yourself, including potentially considerations to spin off one company and having a subsidiary that looks after nothing but the data. It's just that's its asset. So it's really interesting to see how this trend for transformation is actually creating a whole new industry around how we look at data and how we monetize that data. And I'm not talking about selling the data. I'm talking about being able to extract more insight from the data, and therefore looking at the return on investment beyond the traditional manner to what about the future growth, future development, future investment that I can make, where I can ultimately generate something that, absent this transformation, I could never have done. And a really good example is if you think about data that's collected, for example, by an organization that looks at driving habits. So imagine that we start digitalizing driving habits through telematics of some kind that are put on vehicles. Imagine the data, if that were in the hands, for example, of the highway patrol, for instance, or traffic officers. Imagine what they could do if we could extract that data, and all of a sudden they could look at it and say, oh, wait a minute, based on the data that we've got in terms of driving patterns, locations, etc., we know that we have a large proportion of cases of speeding in this geography between these hours and these hours. All of a sudden, you can deploy your police forces to slow down that traffic just on the use of data. So what would, for example, a government body pay to be able to have access to that data, even on an anonymized basis, or vice versa, insurance companies? But we're seeing insurance companies certainly use it to lower premiums because they end up rewarding safer driving. So the ROI that we talk about, it even goes beyond the traditional methodologies that we've used, whether they're quantitative or qualitative, to also looking at it from a decision usefulness perspective, really to grow future opportunities and things like that. And I'm seeing this as a growing trend, particularly with chief data officers, which I find absolutely fascinating. So it's the non-traditional way this is coming up, and the partnering that's now happening with the chief financial officer, because the CFO obviously has the rigor around methodologies for ROI and looking at business growth. So we're starting to see some interesting partnerships form that historically may not have been as close as a result of transformation and digitalization. So that I'm finding quite interesting.
Yes, it a little bit, but we do see a big shift on the talents, on the requirements from our employees or the new joiners, and we also see an impact on the profile of the CFO. So, David, since you had the mic, what's your take on how do you price a happy employee, or the fact that you don't have to hire a new employee for the same job every second month? So what is the impact of transformation on talents and the way you keep them? And then we can talk about the impact on us.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll preface the question by saying the answer to this question very much depends on what part of the world you live in. So I think for some parts of the world where roles tend to be more labor-based or more repetitive, the impact that digitalization and transformation can end up having can be quite dramatic. And it can literally change the way that society ends up functioning. So I think, you've certainly got that one end of the spectrum that's very real in some countries. You've got the other end of the spectrum where you've got workforces that are typically in knowledge-based careers, and the implementation or the support of digitalization and transformation is actually really exciting at that end of the spectrum, because it allows individuals to move into more value added activities, whether that's data insight, as we talked about, whether that's deeper business partnering, whether that's being able to start to predict and forecast more accurately. A lot of these things become very interesting, and the role tends to be more strategic. So you've got two ends of the spectrum, and each of those require very different skill sets. So if you look at the end of the spectrum that's typically knowledge-based employees and looking at what they do, for them, it's moving them up the scale in terms of data skills, in terms of technology skills, so they start to become a little more sufficient, or self-sufficient, I should say, with technology like RPA, RPA Plus, for example, and even thinking about how they can start to train and help train machine learning, and how we can glean insights from those kinds of technologies to support the function. Just look at what ChatGPT has done in less than a year, and think about now how embedded that is in the context of what happens, and think about the value of the data that it has through all of the questions that it's been asked and all of the data that it's ultimately consumed. So you've really got this very interesting spectrum. If you think about the other end of the spectrum I mentioned a little bit earlier, where it tends to be more manual based or it tends to be more repetitive, the skill set change that we need there is to move into more of a service-based economy, and thinking about how do we help individuals retrain, in many cases, their skill sets. So if an individual, for example, was part of a production line in a factory and now that's been completely automated, then how do we and what do we retrain them to do in the context of the environment from within which they work? So it's really thinking about how we can transition individuals, and it's thinking about it not just from the educational infrastructure perspective, but also the responsibility that companies, corporates, and CFOs have for the communities within which they operate. And that ties very much back to the theme of ESG and sustainability. It's being more mindful of the impact that we end up having as well, and how we end up supporting the transition of individuals in those roles. So I think the impact on talent really varies. It depends very much on kinds of jobs, kinds of industry, and what the economies in certain countries, or every country, is primarily based on, because the impacts will be quite different. And clearly the profile of the CFO, I think, is an extension of that. And thinking about ultimately the role is changing in a way that it's no longer what was historically referred to as the bean counter. Now, I'm dating myself a little bit, because certainly my wife, when she first met me and I tried to explain to her what I did, she said, "Do you mean you just count beans?" And I said, "Yeah, sweetie, that's exactly what I do." So you've kind of got that traditional view of what the CFO is, but you think about, ultimately, how has that evolved over time with the technologies that we're talking about and the tools that we're talking about, and the insights that all of a sudden we can glean that we never could before with Excel. As much as I love Excel, and certainly I have fond memories of doing inventory reconciliations many moons ago now around that, but now it's a very different environment. Now there's this concept, and I think you introduced it a little bit earlier, Armand, around this continuous audit process, because the technology now allows a very different approach. So now I might be starting to think about, how do I now optimize my inventory? Because I don't have to wait until I do a count to find out I've got aged items, that I've got slow moving items. I don't have this lag anymore the way I did. So it changes the nature of what I do in terms of how I proactively end up supporting the business and what I end up doing. So it means to me that the CFO is moved into being much more people oriented, and making sure that they can support the transition of people from traditional kind of industrial type roles into more digital age roles, which is a very different profile. But at the same time, it's being a really effective communicator. How do I help the business understand where we're going, understand what to think about, and do it in a way they understand? So I think the importance of communication has grown substantially for the CFO in particular. And of course, the need for technical skills, because there is still the level of compliance that's absolutely essential to the role, whether we call it controllership function, compliance function, combination of both. That is still a requisite skill set that I think CFOs will always need. And there'll be a level of judgment necessary that machines ultimately will not be able to replace. So I think it's just recognizing where on the transition curve one is, depending on what's one's industry, one's location, etc., and then thinking about how to best support. So I think the impact can be anything from, let's say, relatively small to actually quite dramatic, but ultimately each needs an appropriate response.
Thank you.
Did that answer the question?
Please, yes. As you we can hear, you are very passionate about this topic. You even wrote a book, I think, on these topics. So, Sunil, actually, before I ask Sunil to comment, I would like to remind the audience to write on the chat any questions they have. Even though we are tackling a lot of topics, I'm sure there are additional comments we can make. So, Sunil, on talents and the CFO profile, what can you add?
Yeah. Actually, it's an interesting dynamic happening at this point. And you think about it in a way where we have a technology which actually helps to lower the skill set, in a sense that technology becomes like enabler. And if you see certain finance functions where you needed more domain expertise in the past, we are saying that technology will help us to do a better job. So that actually lowers the people or resources skill set to actually get that particular job done. So that's one dynamic aspect of it. And the second dynamic, which is also interesting, which is happening. So as the existing skill set become more and more expensive, there's a pressure that, hey, well, you find in the market what is more affordable to you and get the job done. So now you have two or three dynamics. So third dynamic over here is that in order to make the useful use of this particular technology, you require a certain different kind of skill set. So now you have skill set which is becoming a little bit obsolete, what you have, and then you also need a skill set which you can use this technology into. So that being said, it's a kind of interesting dynamic, and it's going to balance it out at some point. And especially with disruptive technologies like AI, we have seen that AI technology with ChatGPT, as David mentioned, it is transformative on its own. And when people will build models further on ChatGPT, you will see that the outcome is going to be wild, and it needs to be regulated. In fact, there are a lot of countries already talking about regulating this whole process in a way that it is at least not harmful to the society in general. So it's kind of interesting, and this the whole idea about this talent impact, which is a real question, but it's going to be different dynamics at the play, and it's going to play it out, and we'll see what happens. But one thing for sure, people are going for better technology. People are going for more productivity, and also people are going for more constraints because of social media. That it's not like earlier days where you can do whatever you want to do. There are some regulations, there are certain things, and there is some social binding on, especially through social media. So a lot of things over here which are playing out, especially with talents part, and definitely is going to be impactful for CFO and CFO back office going forward.
Armand, can I maybe pick up on something that Sunil said and also address, I think, one of the questions that we have in the chat from, is it Mike? So the question, and I think, Sunil, you make a really good point about this context of technology can sometimes lower the need for a skill set. That's a double-edged sword. And it's this context of two things. One is there's already a perception these technologies are a proverbial black box, and they're kind of intimidating. We don't quite understand them, and somehow we get something out of them, and then we end up relying on that thing. What I'm starting to see a little bit more of is if we're not, and when we're not teaching the basics, individuals, when they look at the output, have difficulty in some cases determining whether or not it's correct. And that's a really interesting dynamic. So the whole idea of lowering the skill set necessary is one that has a dual effect. Either it can be very helpful if the technology works perfectly, never fails, and it's configured correctly, taught correctly, whatever the case may be, depending on the technology type. But it can also be one that ends up becoming incredibly problematic, particularly when individuals within the function don't recognize there's a problem, because they don't quite understand what happens within the box, nor do they have the skill set necessary to form a perspective on what should come out of the box. So I'm actually seeing companies that are in many cases demanding more skill from individuals, particularly through finance transformation, to be sure that what's put in place is in fact functioning as exactly as it's intended to function. So I'm actually seeing a pull for greater demand on that skill set because of the perception of a black box and not quite understanding how it works. And that's true, whether that's the business or even in some cases, honestly, the finance function. It's a really interesting dynamic. And I think part of the success of the implementation of these technologies and tools is making sure that there is sufficient skill set at a high enough level that there can be a confidence that whatever is happening through the technology and the output it is providing is exactly as it's meant to be, even if we're not going through the 100 steps to get there. So I think there's this balance, to your point, that's really interesting. I think it could very well shape the talent market and the demand for highly skilled individuals, and could become very, very competitive in the not too distant future.
Unless Sunil wants to comment, I think what you just said leads very well into the next question I wanted to ask you. We talked about data process, we talked about transformation, even new business models. But what about the organization? And the way we spread our people internally or outside, nearshore, onshore, offshore. So is automation reshuffling all of that? So what do you see, Sunil, as impact of automation or of transformation on the shared services organization and the BPO models?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been a big impact on shared services and BPO models, especially with this evolving technology, and especially with AI coming on board. And the way I look at it is that back in the days, we used to talk about nearshore, offshore, onshore. With the pandemic, people started going even away from offices, and they started working from homes, working from remotely. And that actually, in a way, it propelled more offshoring, or for that matter, more nearshoring, or basically you don't need to be in the office to get the job done. Now, obviously, we have come back to a stage where corporations are finding difficult to get employees back in the office. So now you're again talking about, hey, well, how will attract people back in the office? Because end of the day, efficiency point of and productivity point of view, there is not so good impact on that part. So it's a mixed bag. Certain companies, they are demanding them workers to come back, employees to come back. There are certain companies who are say, okay, we can live with it, maybe 3 days in a week, 2 days in a week. So the point I would like to make here is that the shared services and BPO models, there's a big impact on this. And especially with the technology part, it is definitely making a bigger impact because most of the shared services are formed on the basis that we will centralize these resources to help corporations to do the same job more efficiently and more centralized way and more automated way. So that automation aspect with the AI tools available in the markets, etc. Again, there is skill set point of view. David also alluded to this particular point. Now, this requirement in shared services, what it was used to be earlier, adopting technology, that is changing, that is evolving. Again, there is a cost point of view also. There is a discussion about, hey, how we can make the shared services effective and more efficient. So there are, again, technology embracement point of view. Hey, what more can be done with our existing shared services? So there is a big impact. So what I'm saying is the way I look at it, and especially my conversation with larger organizations as well as medium to small organizations, I'll say that is impacting a lot. And actually, there is a churning going on at this point, and there's a lot of question marks. There are a lot of things, what to do, especially with the newer things, options available in the market. How can we leverage that? And there are a lot of companies who are focused on this, such as Datamatics, our company as well. But what I'm saying is that the whole idea over here is that how can we do the things better, more economical, at the same time in compliance with all the regulatory norms and regulations available in the market. So it's kind of interesting topic, and David, they definitely would like to hear your perspective on this part as well.
It's a great question, and one of the things that's really interesting from my perspective is the increased movement and discussion towards a completely autonomous BPO or shared service type of function. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if we move in that direction so that we even move to potentially a people-less environment in some functional areas. I'm not saying I advocate that, but I'm finding it interesting how the technology is enabling that conversation, but also enabling that possibility. So like you, I think there is a significant impact on how work is done, where it's done. I think the implementation, if you will, or the growth of cloud over the last 5 years, in particular during the pandemic, as you quite rightly said, I think that raises some interesting questions around data, data housing. Where is it housed? Why is it housed there? Does it create any kind of long-term sustainable risk? How does it change the way we operate? You know, can we move to something that's even more virtual, or do we have to have a combination of nearshore, onshore, and offshore? And then where does this idea of a completely automated shared service model or environment ultimately fit into the discussion as well? So I think this particular area is one that's going to continue to shape, because I think, Armand, you probably know better than everyone, just the evolution of first it was nearshore, then it was offshore, then it's back again. I mean, you've got this hybrid model that seems to be happening because labor arbitrage opportunities around the world are diminishing in many respects. And technology even removes, in some cases, the need for labor arbitrage to the extent that it relies less on people. So I think this whole model is a very interesting one. And we could see, to your point, I think, Sunil, even more shifts around this, I think, in the handful of years ahead of us as technology continues to mature, and particularly around intelligent technologies. And as I said, I think I'll be really interested to see what this people-less shared service model ultimately could end up becoming.
Yes, thank you, David. Of course, I don't think shared services, the BPO model, will disappear. We are just changing the way we are organized, because the lines with this new technology, with the cloud, the lines between shared services, BPO, remote working are quite blurring. So I think we're up for a lot of changes based on the actual outcome of the services. Let's see, questions. Maybe before we go to the last question, I would like to ask on the key success factors for digital transformation. We have a question here. What raw data from Kelvin? What raw data is required in order to achieve success? So quite technical, but we would like to say a few words on how do we actually, you know what, I'm going to start because we didn't mention it clearly, but we are shifting from working with processes to working with data. And if we don't have, and AI is based on data, machine learning is all about data. So if we don't have good quality data, if we don't have lots of data that we extract, it doesn't work. That's why we see now these new tools appearing based on natural language processing, on process mining, on computer vision. So we do all of that to go from unstructured, as we call it, unstructured data, to structured data that we can work with. So to answer Kelvin, my first answer would be we need to move from unstructured to structured data with all the available tools. Otherwise, we cannot have these new technologies based on AI. So what about you guys? Any comments?
Maybe I'll add one quick comment, and then I'll leave it to Sunil to summarize. I think on the question of raw data, I think, frankly, the answer is it depends. Now, this is always my favorite answer in finance because sometimes it's not so absolute. I think it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So I think understanding the problem you're trying to solve, I think, is a big driver behind what data is required. And I agree with you, Armand. getting it into a point where it's structured and it can be machine read and processed, I think is hugely important to extract value from it. On the question of the factors that contribute to a successful transformation, I'm going to cite just one. I know there are more than one, so I'm going to leave the others as well to the two of you to answer. But to me, the single biggest factor, and I don't think it'll surprise anybody that I say this, is people. Because I think the people ultimately end up driving the quality, the success, and the value to which this transformation is ultimately embraced and accepted within the organization. So Sunil, I'll turn it over to you. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so, David, I think you covered it well with your answer for data as well as for people. What is critical from organization point of view, depending on, of course, what is the size of the organization, what play they have in the market, etc. Even though CFO is a kind of more or less like a back office function in certain areas, whereas in certain areas like revenue, etc., it is front ending as well. What I've seen is that technology is going to be here. It is going to be evolving, and it's going to help to do your job better. But what's important is that in making the right decision, that which technology is good. So the factors that will contribute to the success are going to be that what technology you choose and what partner you use, whether you're doing it in-house, whether you're getting it somebody done from somebody else. I think these two are important part. What technology you go with, and second is whom you go with, to implement this technology. Because end of the day, it's all about skill set, and we have seen that certain technologies are implemented with great success. Certain technologies are not produce the required ROI or etc. So that being said, it's very important that you choose the right technology, you choose the right partner, and as long as resources are concerned, that's always is going to be very, very important. The resources is always the key role, and even though newer technology at some point will make people more efficient, the way I look at it is that their skill set at some point will be changed. We have seen that in the last century, in fact, more than one century, that all this industrialization, right from steam engine, and then the way the technologies evolved, and then we had Uber portals world coming out across. Then we had pandemic. So it is going to be evolving, and the way that impacts is basically your choices which you make, the decisions you make to embrace the technology and the partner, and how does it impact your resources. That's critical. So that's kind of comes to my mind, David.
Armand, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, I would just a few words to add to what you said on the key success factors. Governance is key, meaning having a set of expertise internally to drive the automation, to talk to the stakeholders. Governance can mean having the strong support from top management. And governance can also mean having a joint team with business people, finance people, but also IT. We tend to forget that transformation, digital, is based on software. And if we don't work well with IT from the very beginning, it won't work at all. That's also the experience we have. And for the rest, people choosing the right technology, we already said it. I think time is up. I think we have answered the questions. And I guess, unless Sunil and David, you would like to make one last comment, I'm going to thank you, but you have a few seconds if you wish. Sunil, what would you like to add to what we have said?
I'll go back. I'll just quickly mention something which all of us, we know it, but I'll just mention it here. Change is the only constant thing in life. And that being said, more technology is coming our way, and we make the right decisions, we choose right partners, and we make sure that it's in aligned to companies' goals. And that's something which is key to success. That's the way I look at it. So back to you.
Thank you, David. Last word.
I would say, well said, Sunil. I think you summarized that expression really well. I would probably bring us back to something that Richard Branson has said in the past, which I think for me resonates really strongly and I think fits here, which is if you put the employees at the heart of everything you do, they will take care of customers. So I would say when it comes to transformation, digitalization, keep them at the heart of what we do. And ultimately, they'll end up becoming the strongest ambassadors for the company as well.
Okay,
Great.
and for me, only 2 words. Thank you to you, Sunil, to you, David. Thank you to Marcus Evans for inviting me, and of course, thank you for all the people who listened to us in the past hour. Thank you, and have a great day and holiday season. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Armand.
Thank you.
And thank you all for sharing this great insights and for being so generous with your time today. Just a quick reminder to look out for an email within the next 2 hours with links to download today's material. And if you would like to continue today's conversation and learn more about finance automation, you can book a meeting with the Datamatics team directly through Book a Meeting or request a demo through request a demo widget. We'd also like your feedback. So if you could take a minute to answer our very brief survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of the session, that would be very much appreciated. On behalf of Datamatics and Marcus Evans webinars, we would like to thank you all for joining us today. And we do hope that you will be listening in at our next webinars. Thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.